If you grew up in Canada, you know exactly what Tim Hortons used to feel like. You walked in on a cold morning, and before you even reached the counter, someone already knew your order. The woman behind the register had been working there for 15 years. The coffee was hot, the donuts were fresh, and the whole place smelled like something your grandmother would have made. The staff greeted you by name. They knew what you wanted before you opened your mouth. It wasn't loud or fancy or trying to be anything it wasn't. It was just warm, reliable, and completely Canadian. The double double wasn't just a drink order, it was a cultural password. It meant you belonged here. Every hockey practice at 6 in the morning ended at Tim Hortons. Every road trip had a Tim Hortons cup in the cup holder. Every conversation that mattered in this country happened over a Tim Hortons coffee at a small table by the window. That place is gone. And what replaced it is one of the most calculated and coldest corporate betrayals in Canadian history. Walk into a Tim Hortons today, and the experience hits you immediately, and not in a good way. The bathrooms have needles in them, flies are landing on the donuts in the display case. One Ontario location exposed its own customers to hepatitis A after a food handler tested positive, and nobody caught it before people were already sick. A woman bit into an apple fritter, felt something hard in her mouth, and pulled out a fingernail that had been baked directly into the dough. She gave the rest of the donut to her dog and said she would never eat a Tim Hortons donut again. A mother walked in with her 3-year-old daughter, and the child looked around and said, "You, mommy, what's that smell?" A father drove to his local Tim Hortons 3 weeks after his daughter passed away because the chocolate glazed donut was her favorite. She got one every single day after school, whether her mom was picking her up, whether he was picking her up, or whether her grandmother was. He just wanted that one small thing to feel close to her. The employee told him they don't carry that donut anymore. These are not isolated incidents. This is the pattern. This is what Tim Hortons has become. The drive through tells you to park and wait for a coffee. Not a complex order, a coffee. The whole architecture of a drive through exists so that you do not have to put your car in park. That is the entire point. But you pull up, you wait, someone comes on the speaker with no greeting, just yes, and then they hand you something cold when you get to the window. A woman pulled up at 3 in the morning, ordered a double double, received a cup that was cold to the touch, pointed this out politely, and was told by the employee, "I don't know what happened." She handed it back, told them to keep it, rolled up her window, and drove across the street to McDonald's. She said the fake smile she got at McDonald's was better than anything she received at Tim Hortons.
Hello there, welcome to McDonald's. My name is Adam. It's always a pleasure to serve my customers, and that's a guarantee.
Good evening. Hi.
Hi. Thank you.
Oh, here.
Total today was 8:06. Oh, look at that. 10:10. Bada bing, bada boom. How's your day, miss?
It's perfect. And yours?
Fantastic. My day is amazing. Main reason? I love my job, I love what I do, and I especially love spending as much time as I can with my customers in the next 10-15 seconds. I want to make sure that everyone has a great day. That's why I do everything I can for them.
You're great. Thank you. You're very popular around here.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Honestly, I never expected it. I never did. I did a live stream last night on my Facebook page, and I just showed so much appreciation for everybody. I love you all. Every single one of you. I care about every single one of you. You come to this McDonald's, you best believe I'm giving you the best service because welcome to McDonald's, and how can I help you this fine evening?
Why don't you tell everybody where we're at?
We are at the Mill Street McDonald's on Leominster, in Leominster, right by the Whitney Field Mall. Come on down, I'll serve ya.
All right. Thank you, Adam.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That night. That says everything. Orders come out wrong, incomplete, or not at all. Boston cream donuts arrive completely empty, ice caps come out as liquid, and when a customer sends it back and asks for it to be made properly, the employee tells her it is policy and that the manager does not allow changes. Then he laughs at her. She's 31 years old. She worked at Tim Hortons herself when she was 15 and 16, and she remembers that if you were not serving a customer, you were cleaning. You were mopping, you were sweeping, you were restocking, and if you ever laughed at a customer, you would have had a very serious conversation with management, and you would have felt the consequences. That culture is completely gone. Two orders of egg bites come in one box because apparently giving customers two separate boxes for two separate orders is now too much to ask. A family opens three donuts on camera and finds every single one of them completely empty. No cream, no filling, nothing, and holds them up to show the world what $5 buys you at Tim Hortons in 2025. Canadians do not complain easily. That is a genuine cultural trait. They absorb bad service and move on quietly. So when Canadians are publicly and loudly and repeatedly going on camera to say they are done, that they are genuinely finished, that nothing has ever fallen off harder, you have to understand that the threshold for that kind of public anger in this country is extraordinarily high. When Canadians are this vocal, it is really, truly bad. To understand how deep this betrayal actually runs, you have to go back to where it started. Tim Horton was a real person, a Toronto Maple Leafs defenseman who opened his first coffee and donut shop in Hamilton, Ontario in 1964. The concept was almost aggressively simple: cheap coffee, fresh donuts, a warm place to sit, no pretension, no complexity, no $15 seasonal beverages with 17 ingredients, just affordable food served to working Canadians by people who treated you like a neighbor. The brand grew because it told the truth about the country it was born in. Canada is not a nation of luxury. It is a nation of early alarms, long winters, hockey arenas before sunrise, and highway drives that stretch for hours across empty flatland. Tim Hortons fit all of that perfectly. It was everywhere you needed it to be. It cost what you could afford, and it felt like it was genuinely yours. By the time the chain had spread from British Columbia to Newfoundland, it had stopped being just a business and had become something closer to infrastructure. It was woven into the daily rhythm of the country in a way that no other brand has ever managed to replicate. The double double became shorthand for being Canadian. Politicians referenced it, athletes celebrated with it, immigrants described getting their first Tim Hortons coffee as the moment Canada finally felt real to them. That kind of brand loyalty, that depth of emotional connection, takes decades to build, and it cannot be manufactured. It has to be earned. That loyalty became the single most valuable thing the company owned. More valuable than 4,000 locations, more valuable than the supply chain, more valuable than any lease or any piece of commercial real estate, and it's precisely what got packaged up and sold to the highest bidder. In 2014's Burger King and Tim Hortons merged in a deal worth approximately $12 billion. The new parent company was called Restaurant Brands International. The financial engine behind the deal was 3G Capital, a Brazilian American private equity firm that operates with one of the most aggressive and well documented cost cutting philosophies in the entire corporate world. The strategy is not complicated and they have never hidden it. You identify a brand with deep consumer loyalty, you acquire it, you cut operational costs to the absolute minimum, you franchise everything you possibly can, and then you collect royalties from every franchisee every single month while they absorb all the risk and all the blame when things go wrong. 3G Capital had already run this exact playbook on Burger King before Tim Hortons. They ran it again on Popeyes afterward. Tim Hortons was not a passion project or a cultural stewardship, it was the next target. The name was worth billions. The nostalgia was worth billions. The actual coffee and the actual donuts and the actual people behind the counter were overhead to be reduced. Most Canadians did not fully register what had happened the day that deal closed. The cups still said Tim Hortons. The signs were still red. The drive-throughs were still there. But the ownership, the financial priorities, and the entire operating logic of the company had been fundamentally and permanently changed. It was no longer a Canadian company selling coffee to Canadians. It was a foreign investment vehicle extracting value from Canadian identity. And the extraction started immediately. The food was the first thing to go. Not all at once, not in a way that triggered immediate outrage, but steadily and deliberately. The chocolate glazed donut, one of the original items, the donut that a father drove to get 3 weeks after losing his daughter because it was her daily ritual, got discontinued. Classic menu items disappeared without announcement or explanation. The ones that remained got smaller, cheaper, and less carefully made. The coffee that was once brewed fresh on a strict schedule started arriving lukewarm and then cold. And instead of fixing what was broken, corporate responded by expanding the menu in every direction that had nothing to do with coffee or donuts. Flatbread pizzas appeared, burgers appeared, paninis appeared. Items that had no business existing inside a Tim Hortons showed up on the menu and confused everybody. When customers pushed back, the company announced it was getting back to its roots. They brought back a handful of original donuts, gave them a new name, charged more for them, generated a wave of positive press coverage, and then quietly discontinued them again within 2 years. Then they announced another return to basics, then another. The cycle repeated itself on a loop while the bathrooms got worse, the orders got more wrong, the staff got less trained, and the royalty payments to Restaurant Brands International went out on time every single quarter without interruption. This is not a brand that lost its way by accident. This is a brand that was deliberately hollowed out by people who understood exactly what they were doing and did it anyway, because the financial model rewarded them for it, regardless of what happened to the product. The Tim Hortons that knew your name is gone. Part two is about the machinery that replaced it and the full scale of what that machinery has actually cost this country. Here's the second part. Here's the question that should genuinely bother every Canadian who has been paying attention. Tim Hortons has spent years accumulating documented quality failures. The health violations are on public record. The customer complaints are not fringe opinions on obscure forums, they're everywhere, constant and growing louder every single year. The Net Promoter Score, which measures how likely a customer is to recommend a brand to someone they know and trust, consistently places Tim Hortons below Starbucks. Below Starbucks, a company that Canadians spent 30 years dismissing as overpriced American pretension, now scores higher in Canadian customer satisfaction than the brand that was supposed to be the antidote to all of that. And yet, Tim Hortons' revenue keeps growing every year. How does a brand that its own customers openly despise keep reporting higher numbers? The answer is structural and is deliberately obscured. Restaurant Brands International does not own most Tim Hortons locations. Individual franchise operators do. A person, or more commonly, a small investment group, pays for the right to operate a Tim Hortons under the brand name, and in exchange, they pay RBIA, royalty based on a percentage of their gross sales, every single month. Not their profit, their gross sales. This means RBI collects its cut regardless of whether the individual franchise is actually making money, regardless of whether the coffee is hot, regardless of whether the donut has a filling, regardless of whether there are flies on the display case or needles in the bathroom, or a food handler who just tested positive for hepatitis A. None of that affects the royalty payment. The franchisee absorbs every one of those risks completely alone. This creates a corporate incentive structure that has nothing to do with quality. RBI's revenue increases every time a new location opens, so the priority is location growth. Open more franchises, collect more royalties, report higher revenue, satisfy shareholders. What happens inside those locations after the ribbon is cut is, from RBI's financial perspective, the franchisee's problem. The brand recognition belongs to RBI. The liability belongs to the operator. The profit flows upward and the consequences flow downward. And the customer standing at the counter gets whatever is left over after that equation has been solved. This is why the cycle of public outcry and corporate non-response makes complete sense once you understand the structure. RBI does not need you to love Tim Hortons. They need you to keep going. And because of where Tim Hortons is physically located, on every major highway, at every suburban intersection, open before the sun comes up with the drive-through that requires no more effort than slowing your car down slightly, a huge percentage of Canadians keep going not out of loyalty, but out of pure geographic convenience. You are not choosing Tim Hortons at 6 in the morning on the Trans-Canada Highway. You are choosing the only option visible from the road. That is not a free market. That is a moat. The entrenchment runs deeper than just location count. If you wanted to open a competitor tomorrow, a real competitor that could challenge Tim Hortons at scale across this country, You would need a dedicated real estate team working full time just to find suitable locations. And the moment you signed your first lease, Tim Hortons could open directly next door, and the brand familiarity alone would absorb the majority of your potential customers before you served your first cup. Independent coffee shops that offer genuinely better food and genuinely better service cannot replicate 4,000 locations with drive throughs open at 4 in the morning. Canadians who are running late and need coffee are not making values based purchasing decisions at that moment. They are pulling into the first drive through they see. Tim Hortons wins that transaction every time, simply by existing at the right coordinates. Layer Canada's population growth on top of that, and the revenue picture becomes even clearer. Every year, there are more Canadians. Many of them are experiencing Tim Hortons for the first time and have no emotional comparison point. They do not know what the chocolate glaze used to taste like. They did not grow up with the woman behind the counter who knew their name. They just know it is cheap, it is fast, and it is everywhere. So the long term customers who grew up with the brand and are now leaving in genuine disgust are being quietly replaced by new arrivals who have not yet been disappointed enough to stop. The revenue grows, the underlying loyalty continues to erode, and RBI reports another strong quarter. Hudson's Bay Company grew revenue every year too, right up until the year it collapsed entirely and started closing stores across the country. Revenue growth is not the same thing as brand health. It's not the same thing as long term viability. It is a lagging indicator, and by the time it turns negative, the damage has already been done for years. Now, here's where this story becomes something much larger than bad coffee and empty donuts. Tim Hortons franchisees increased their use of the temporary foreign worker program by 1,131% over 4 years. That number is not a typo, 1,131%. In the first 6 months of one recent year alone, the program issued 105,000 work permits across industries that rely on it, already exceeding the annual cap that had been publicly promised by the government. If that pace continued through the remainder of the year, over 200,000 temporary foreign workers would have entered the Canadian labor market in a single calendar year, in a period when young Canadians were already facing record unemployment rates. 20-year-old Canadians born in this country, raised in this country, are submitting job applications and not hearing back. Real people, real kids. And the brand that built its entire public identity on the image of everyday hardworking Canadians, the brand that put Canadian flags in its advertising and called itself a piece of national culture, is structurally incentivized to bypass those same Canadians in its hiring practices. The reason is not complicated once you follow the money.
Listen, Tim Hortons, when you hire people, I don't care if they're immigrants or whatnot. I don't care, really. Just make sure they speak English, okay? Speak English. Because even as a brown guy, I sometimes don't understand what's happening in there. Their accent is so thick, so thick. Even me, even though I put on accent sometimes, I did not understand. When you hire, please, nothing wrong with hiring immigrants, but they need to speak English. English clearly. Clear English. Even if it was like, hey, can I have a medium double French vanilla and some bagel cream cheese? At least I somewhat understand that, right? There's some people in there like, they even know English? How did they get the job? Did they interview you, you boss of Tim Hortons? Most of you guys are white, by the way, the bosses. When you interviewed these people, did you understand what they were saying? Let me know in the comments below that hiring immigrants, subsidizing. So there's a difference here. If I was an immigrant, I came to Canada, I'm working hard and I need a job, that's different. But these companies are hiring immigrants because they're subsidizing, they're paying less. The government is paying them to hire these immigrants, so they pay less. I worked at Tim Hortons. I made sure my English was good. Well, I was born here, so it should be good. But even I worked with immigrants from other countries. They did a fantastic job speaking English. Sure, they had accents, but that's fine. It makes us unique. I love accents. Anyway, let me know in the comments below, what do you think about that? Like, nothing wrong with hiring immigrants, but they need to speak English and stop subsidizing, you bunch of government bastards.
Franchisees are being squeezed from both directions simultaneously. Food costs are rising, and RBI's royalty structure takes its percentage of gross sales, regardless of whether the franchisee is profitable. That leaves labor as the only significant cost that a franchise operator can actually control. Temporary foreign workers on closed work permits, meaning permits tied to a specific employer, have extremely limited ability to leave to negotiate or to demand better conditions or higher wages. They are, by the design of the program itself, a more controllable and more affordable workforce than Canadian workers who can quit on a Tuesday because they found something better. So the franchisee cuts labor costs to survive the margin squeeze. RBI collects its royalty unaffected. The Canadian worker does not get the job. The Canadian customer gets undertrained staff and a worse experience. And the cycle continues. The parent company is entirely insulated from all of it. The accountability lands on the franchise operator. The financial benefit flows to the investment firm in a tower somewhere far away from the drive through where a 20-year-old Canadian just got told there are no positions available. Some people will say Tim Hortons is a private business and it can hire whoever it wants. And technically, that is true. But there is a difference between a business making a hiring decision and a business that marketed itself for 60 years as a symbol of Canadian identity, extracted decades of emotional loyalty from Canadian consumers based on that identity, and then used that accumulated goodwill as cover while systematically replacing Canadian workers with cheaper imported labor to protect the profit margins of a foreign investment firm. That is not just a business decision, that is a betrayal with a very specific financial logic behind it. Tim Hortons is not going to disappear tomorrow. The entrenchment is real. The drive throughs are real. The population growth is real. There will always be a percentage of Canadians who pull in simply because it is the only option at that exit. But the brand that Canadians were actually loyal to, the one built on warmth and familiarity and the feeling of being known, that brand died in 2014 when the signature went on the $12 billion acquisition agreement. What has been operating under the red sign ever since is something entirely different. It is a royalty extraction machine that inherited the name, kept the logo, and has been spending down 60 years of earned Canadian trust like a line of credit with no intention of paying it back. The real betrayal is not the cold coffee or the fingernail in the apple fritter or the discontinued chocolate glazed donut. The real betrayal is that they kept the name and used your nostalgia against you. They knew exactly how much that name was worth to Canadians. They bought it specifically because of that worth, and then they ran it into the ground while charging you for the privilege of watching it happen, one watered down double double at a time. Tim Hortons did not fail by accident. It was purchased, hollowed out, and left standing just long enough to keep collecting your money. The cups are still red. The sign still says Tim Hortons. But the thing you were actually loyal to, that warm, familiar place that felt like it was built specifically for this country and the people in it, that has been gone for over a decade. You've just been paying for the ghost of it. And the hardest part of this entire story is not the empty donuts or the cold coffee or the needles in the bathroom. The hardest part is that it did not have to be this way. The brand was perfect, the loyalty was real. The foundation that Tim Horton himself built in Hamilton in 1964 was genuinely something worth protecting. A simple concept, honest food, people who treated you like a neighbor. That was it. That was all it needed to be. And someone looked at all of that and decided the nostalgia was worth more than the reality. So they sold the reality and kept billing you for the nostalgia. There is a father somewhere in Belleville who drove to Tim Hortons 3 weeks after losing his daughter just to feel close to her one more time through a chocolate glazed donut. And they told him they do not carry it anymore. That is not a quality control failure. That is not a supply chain issue. That is what happens when a company loses the plot so completely that it cannot even perform the most basic function of the brand it is supposed to be protecting. That moment should bother every single person who ever had a Tim Hortons order that meant something to them. And most Canadians have one. So here's what I want to know from you. Do you remember the Tim Hortons that actually felt like yours? The specific location, the specific person behind the counter, the specific order that meant something on a specific morning. Tell me that story in the comments below, because those stories are worth more than anything Tim Hortons corporate has said publicly in the last 10 years. And if you know someone who still defends this company out of pure habit and nostalgia, send them this video. Not to argue with them, just to make sure they know exactly what they are being loyal to now and who is actually benefiting from that loyalty. Because it is not Canada, and it is not them.